Hello there and welcome to Fyendal's Library. My name is Dan and today we're going to be talking about pre-release weekend. So sealed format is something that I've played a lot of and I thought it would be helpful for people that haven't played a lot of sealed or are getting into the game for the first time or just want some general advice about the format and how to do good at your pre-release weekend. Tales of Aria is the new set and there's 3 new heroes that are coming out with this set. There's brand new cards, so even people that have been playing for a long time might get some use out of this video, as we're going to talk about some of the key cards that I think are going to be really good for your sealed decks, and also how some of the cards that you might open in your packs might lead you down. Might be a bit of a trap or might be a bit of a bait. So we're going to talk about that, and I'm also going to make a recommendation at the end for the hero that I think is the strongest in the format. It's very early days to be able to make a statement like that, but there's a few reasons why that might be the case. So let's talk. Before we get stuck in, there's just one thing that I wanted to say, and that is the fact that you can put the promos that you receive in your deck. So if you do decide to play Briar, which is the Earth and Lightning hero, you should ask for the Earth and Lightning promos, because you can put both of them in your deck. But I would say just be careful, because these are note that you can't block with these cards, and you want to be careful and sealed about how many cards in your deck can or can't rather block. It can be really difficult if you get a hand full of cards that can't block, and it can cost you the game. I do think these cards are relatively good. The fact that they're blue is very nice as well. You know, it's not, you want to be keeping at least one card in hand most of the time anyway, so keeping a blue in hand is fine. You can just pitch it, swing back with Rosetta, the weapon for the Rune Blade, or the hammer for Oldhim. Not so good in Lexi because she doesn't have a weapon that works like that. But just be careful about how many no blocks you have in your deck. That's just a general piece of advice I would give. So one of the first decisions you have to make is which hero you want to play. I often will just count the number of cards that I have, and whichever hero I have the most cards for, that is an indicator. It's not the only indicator. You need to look at those cards. Are they good? Do you have enough mix of strong, powerful reds and pitching blues? But there is another element that you also need to take into consideration, and that is the hero ability of these 3 heroes. So let's look at Briar, for example. Briar's ability requires you to play 2 non-attack actions in a turn to create an embodiment of lightning. That is a thing that gives an attack action Go Again. Go Again in sealed I think is really strong, and we'll talk about later about how Go Again is really good in combination with Briar's weapon Rosetta Thorn. So if you want to build a Briar deck, you do need to have access to those non-attack actions that are going to allow you to not only create those Go Again tokens, but also you can then block with them if you manage to create an embodiment of Earth and get really good block value out of it. Embodiment of Earth gives your non-attack actions +1 block if you have activated Briar's ability, and that is done by an attack action card you control dealing damage to an opposing hero. You just create an embodiment of Earth, and that allows your non-attack actions to block more. Just be careful when you're doing that you don't use up all your non-attack actions blocking, because you might actually want to be using those for other things, for example making more embodiments of lightning or swinging Rosetta Thorn for arcane damage, which requires you to play a non-attack action card first. So Briar I think is a very strong hero. There's also Oldhim. Looking at his hammer at the moment, we'll just go back to Oldhim. Here he is. So Oldhim is a guardian hero, has a really interesting ability that allows you to, as a defense reaction, either prevent 2 damage if you pitch a earth card for the cost, or if you pitch an ice card, you put a card from your opponent's hand at the top of their deck. That's kind of nice. Takes a card out of your opponent's hand, so if it's near the start of their turn and they haven't used all their cards yet, you can force them to cut their turn short, really. But it is expensive. It's 3 resources. Do bear in mind if you pitch an earth card and an ice card for this. So for example, if you pitched a red earth card and then a blue ice card, you get both effects, which is really nice. But it is quite expensive though, so you need to make sure you have enough resources to not only pay for Oldhim's defense reaction, which costs 3, but as we saw at the start there, the weapons that Oldhim has, the common weapon, you might get this really good majestic, but the common weapon also costs 3. And you really want to be swinging with Titan's Fists for 4, which requires you to have pitched a card with 3 cost or greater in the pitch zone. So bear that in mind too when you're building your deck. Do you have access to enough 3 cost or higher cards in order to swing with Titan's Fist for 4, a much better breakpoint than 3. You know, you don't really want to be paying 3 resources to swing for 3 with Titan's Fist. That would be very tough. Winter's Wail, though, if you get one of those, that might be a good indicator. Lexi is the Elemental Ranger. She has an ability that lets you turn a card in your arsenal face up. So do bear in mind that the card needs to already be face down. That is relevant. It needs to be face down, so perhaps a card that you arsenaled at the end of your previous turn, as an action, you can turn it face up. If it's a lightning card, your next attack gets go again. If it's an ice card, you create a frostbite token. Just a nice ability there. I do wonder how easy it's going to be to get, cards into arsenal. You need to be thinking about that. But it is good, and the fact that you can create frostbite tokens is really nice. That makes your opponent's cards and abilities cost 1 more, which is really cool. But the weapon for the Lexi is the Shiver. This allows you to put an arrow card from your hand face up into an empty arsenal zone, so just bear in mind that you can't then use Lexi's ability on that card. You need to use Lexi's ability first because it's face up, not face down. And the +1 is really nice, and the Dominate is quite nice for closing out the game. So like I said before, think about which hero you have the most cards for, but also think about, do I have the right cards for each hero? Like, do I have +3 cost blues in order to get the most out of my Titan's Fist hammer swing? Do I have non-attack actions for Briar so I can make those embodiment of lightning tokens and get good block value? So look at those kind of things. But if you're very new, I would probably just say, look at the hero you have the most cards for, and take that as your first indicator. And there's the other element that you need to bear in mind for this set is fuse, which means that you require, if you want to fuse an attack, let me just look on the, so yeah, we've got Autumn's Touch here as an example of an earth card. You need to reveal an earth card to use an earth fuse effect. So you might look at this card, Autumn's Touch, and think, well, this is terrible, it doesn't have any effect, it's just a basic attack. But actually, you need cards like this in your deck if you are going to be relying on these fuse effects, because you need to reveal them as part of the cost to do the fuse effect. And some of the fuse effects are very, very strong. So you want to be looking out for, there's these generic cards like Autumn's Touch, there's an equivalent for Ice and Lightning as well. They don't have an effect, they are just attacks that block for 3. And 3 block is really nice in Tales because quite a lot of the generic Earth, Ice and Lightning cards don't block for 3, they block for 2. So just a little bit of extra block value is a really nice touch. Next, I want to talk about Majestics. So you're likely to get 2 Majestics when you open 6 packs of Tales of Aria. There's normally about 8 Majestics in a box, I believe. So if you open a quarter of a box, you're likely to get 2. But you need to be careful. I see a lot of people pull a Majestic and immediately are like, I'm going to play that hero. I pull a really strong Majestic for one hero, so I'm just going to play that hero. You need to be careful that the Majestic works in your deck, and you need to be careful that the Majestic is relevant for the sealed format. So an example of this is the card Exposed to the Elements, for example. This is quite an expensive card, it costs 2, and it's an instant, so it doesn't block either. And it says, if Exposed to the Elements was fused with an Earth card, you can put a -1 counter on target equipment. That's not really that relevant in this format because the majority of the common equipment doesn't have any block value at all. And the second effect that allows you to destroy an equipment with 0 block is good, I guess, because there are a lot of 0 block equipment. But actually, a lot of the equipment isn't that impactful. You're playing 2 for this, and also you have the risk of having it in your hand and not being able to block with it. It doesn't even cost 3, so you can't even get Titan's Fist value out of it. So you need to think, well, even though I've got this cool Majestic, does this actually work with the deck? There are some cards that I think are really good Majestics and can lead you in the right direction. Endless Winter, for example, is a fantastic card if you can get it off, and you could build a deck around Endless Winter and a lot of blues and just try and, a lot of blue ice cards to try and get Endless Winter off, and that could be your game winning play. But then you have something like Duskblade. Like Duskblade is a really, really cool card, but in a format where you're not there might not be that many turns. Is Duskblade going to get that big, and is it worth not running Rosetta Thorn, which has arcane damage, which is really hard to block in this format? So just because you pull a really cool Majestic, just look at the rest of your deck and think, does this Majestic actually work? Am I just putting it in here because it's a Majestic, or am I putting it here because it works for my deck? So be really careful. And I noticed a lot of the Majestics in this set are also instances as well, which don't block, and I think that is a real liability in Sealed when you have so little health. If you happen to have too many cards in your hand that don't block, or if you pitch them early and they turn up in the late game when you're fighting for your life, that's really bad. Now the opposite thing is rares. Now I think rares are the key cards in a sealed deck. They are generally a little bit stronger than commons, and they are a card that you might get multiple copies of. So in the past, in Welcome to Wraith, for example, if you got a lot of copies of Warrior's Valor, that was a really key indication that you should go for Dorinthia. If you get a lot of copies of the parables, Parable of Humility, Merciful Retribution in Monarch, that was a really good indication you should go for Aura Prism. And good quality rares for your class will sometimes be what puts you ahead of in the mirror. So if your opponent is playing, say, Briar, because they really like Briar, but they didn't really get many of the good rares for Briar, if you come up against them with your rares, you should do better. And there's some really good rares in this set that I just want to draw your attention to. The first one is Bolt and Shot for Lexi. Because you're going to be playing Shiver, which has the +1, Bolt and Shot is really good because you can make its base attack, greater. You make its attack greater than its base, which gives it Go Again, and if it hits Reload. Really strong card in red. It's a 0 cost, deal 5, Go Again. With Reload, if it hits, that's a real threat because it's got Go Again, so you might just be able to do more with another attack. And also the yellow one is quite good because if you're giving it +1, it's now dealing 4, which is a lovely breakpoint. I'm also a big fan of Evergreen. I think you could potentially, if you get a few copies of Evergreen, you could potentially build like a stalling Briar deck that just chips away with the arcane damage from Rosetta Thorn. I think it's also, you could do something similar in Oldhim, because you've got that 3 cost blue pitch in order to prevent the 2 damage from the defense reaction, or swing with the hammer for 4. And I think it's an interesting card, and you could build a really unique deck around this recycling effect when you play it from Arsenal. There's also Frostfang. I just think this card is really cool. It puts your opponent in a really tricky decision. If it hits a hero, they discard a card unless they pay 2. It's almost like you're forcing a card out of their hand, which is really, really nice. And you got good damage on the red, good damage on the yellow, 4 and 5, and it only costs 2. And lastly, a card that I want to speak about in a bit more detail, which is Lightning Press. Now, I've been saying cards that don't block are a liability, but Lightning Press is so good. Attack reactions, I know this is an instant, but it works like an attack reaction. You can play it in the attack reaction phase to buff an attack by 3. It's really, really good. You can reveal this card to fuse a lightning card, and then your opponent knows that you have it, so you're putting them on a huge threat. They have to overblock, and then when they do overblock, you just don't play it, save it for next turn, or save it for future fusing. It's a really, really strong card, and that's coupled with the fact that in this set, there are very few defense reactions. So Runeblade has access to this Sigil of Suffering, and Guardian has access to Turn Timber and Biting Gale, and technically Pulse of Eisenloft as well. So you can see most of these cards require pitch, which is, you're getting 2 cards out of them to prevent the damage from your 1 attack reaction card, which is great. 2 cards out of their hand, obviously 1 gets pitched around. And also, the one that does cost 0, Sigil of Suffering, that is a bit of an issue. But if you're playing Lexi and you manage to get a Frostbite token down, they have to pay 1 for it. So, I just think that if you do get a few copies of Lightning Press, I think this is going to be a really strong card in the format. And it's a game winner. It's like classic Razor Reflex. That +3 to win the game, but it costs 0. Just remember, it's only cards that cost 1 or less, but there's a lot of them out there. Really, really strong card. So, Rosetta Thorn, this card is something I just wanted to talk about in particular, and this is links to my recommendation for what hero I think is probably the strongest in Sealed, which is Briar, and that is because of her access to arcane damage, and access to arcane damage through this weapon that's always going to be on the field. So Rosetta Thorn, it's a once per turn action. If you played a a non-attack action and an attack action card this turn deal 2 arcane damage to target hero. Now, there's very, very few ways to prevent arcane damage in Tales sealed, so it's almost like a guaranteed 2 damage. You could play it really slow and just chip away with them 2 damage at a time, you know, guaranteeing the kill because there's nothing they can do about it. I mean, Oldhim can pitch to prevent the 2 damage with his defense reaction, but you know, it's real tough still. Or you can play more aggressively and just try and beat them down with this guaranteed 2 damage to finish them off at the end. I think this card is really strong. Now, that's not just to say that you always play Briar. There are steps to play Rosetta Thorn correctly. You need to make sure your attack action has go again. You know, if you play a non-attack action and then an attack action, but the attack action doesn't have go again, you can't swing with the weapon. You know, you need to think about these things. So you need to look for cards that fit your strategy, that you need to look for attack action cards that have go again. So for example, you've got Ball Lightning, a really nice card. You've got Entwine Lightning. If you fuse it, it gets go again. It's 0 cost, deal 4 on the red, which is real nice. And you've got Lightning Surge, which if you play from the arsenal, gets go again as well. And of course, you can use Briar's hero ability that we talked about at the beginning. If you play 2 non-attack action cards in a turn, create an embodiment of lightning, then play an attack action that doesn't have go again, it gets go again, and then you swing with the weapon. A really strong turn if you can pull that off. It does require a few cards, you know, 2 non-attack action cards and an attack action card, and enough to pitch for all of that jazz. But you can see that being a really strong turn. So if you're new to the format, I think I would say consider Briar. I think Briar is very strong, but I do think that good quality Lexi and Oldhim decks will definitely put Briar to the test, but you just need to worry about the arcane damage tick. You know, if you're playing Lexi, you might want to go really, really aggressive so you don't just lose in the late game to Rosetta hitting you with 2 arcane every turn and there's nothing you can do about it. You need to think about this. It's also worth bearing in mind that I didn't mention before for Lexi. Lexi doesn't have access to any defense reactions at all, so that lightning press is going to be really strong against her. There's very little that she can do to prevent that damage. So think about your deck, open your deck up, split it all up into piles, look to see which hero's got the most cards, see how many earth cards you've got, see how many ice cards you've got, see how many lightning cards you've got. If you're going to be doing a lot of fusing, make sure you have enough cards to do it. If you're not going to be doing much fusing, then think, well, do I need to run these substandard cards? Like, think about those kind of things. But most of all, try and have a really fun time. Read the cards, that's always key. If you're new to the game, ask for help. Everyone's always really enthusiastic to help new players when it comes to sealed because it's a super fun format. It's a really great way to get into the game because you know you get to take cards home with you at the end of it. But if you are new, it can be a bit intimidating. Ask for help and people are always happy to give it. So I hope this video has been helpful, kind of my hot takes on sealed Tales. There's plenty of stuff that I've not mentioned, but I wanted to keep this relatively short. But I hope this has been helpful and I'll see you next time.